Welcome back. Today we're talking about systems analysis and design, use case narratives. So let's take a look quickly at the key terms that we're going to cover. And these are the UML, Unified Modeling Language key terms. And there's, 10 or 12 of those. And as we've said before, we're going to focus in on the green highlighted items here. So these are in alphabetical order. Class diagrams, Unified Modeling Language, that's what we're working in. And we've been working on use case diagrams, and today we're going to do use case narratives. So we're all the way at the bottom looking at use cases. So a use case is one way of using the system, and we can identify actors, the users of the system, and we can identify the use cases, the way they use the system. And we place this all on a use case diagram, and that's really kind of useful. It shows us how the system's going to be kind of organized, how it's going to be used. We do that, remember, with ovals, stick figures, joining the two. But what it leaves out is the details of how the system is actually going to work. And that's on purpose, remember. The beautiful thing about a use case is behind all those ovals is the detail of how the programming is going to work. And that's very useful when you're talking with people who are going to use the system, people who are going to pay for the system, people who are going to sponsor and support the system. It's useful to hide all the details so you can talk about whether you're covering all the actions, all the things, all the uses that you want for the system. But at some level, of course, the devil's in the details. And so we need to get down into the details of what the use will be of the system. And use case narratives gets that done. So a use case narrative, what is it? Well, it's really us spelling things out. And you have to supply information on how the use case is going to work. And you need to put it somewhere, but remember, the whole point of use case diagrams is to keep things simple, but we also don't want to lose the details. And so how we do that is we have a narrative that kind of sits behind the use case diagram. Figuratively, as it says here on this slide, we put the details inside the use case, and sometimes these are called use case specifications because we specify what's going to happen with the use case. And basically what that means is how the system behaves when it's triggered, put into action, used by the actors. And so there are 9 steps to a use case narrative, and we're going to go through them all together now. Step 1, identify and name your use case. Now, we've pretty much done that for our use case diagrams, so we've got that covered. Step 2, draw a diagram indicating the use case. Well, that's what we did last time. That was our use case diagrams part. So that's great. Describe the use case briefly. Give a sentence outlining the purpose of the use case. You may or may not have done that with your use case diagram, but obviously once you've done a use case diagram, it should be pretty simple to briefly describe the use case. So that's step 3. And then step 4 is narrate the story of what happens in the use case. And as you can imagine, this is the key step for a use case narrative, is narrating the use case. And it's a written story, which is kind of interesting. And as it says here on the slide, usually it starts with the phrase, this use case starts when the actor does something, and then describes what the actor and the system do in the normal course of events. Often this description takes the form of alternating steps, as in the actor does this, the system does that. The actor does this, the system does that. Or as it says here, well, actually it doesn't say it just says how this ends. So on the use case ends when the system does something and the actor's goal is satisfied. So back to the booking system, if we were looking to reserve a room, then that particular use case would end with room reservation given back to actor. Sometimes there are alternate paths that might happen, and you have an option to give those in the narration as well. And as it kind of says here, there's no actual UML structure for exactly how to do a use case narrative. And so again, that's why I have these 9 steps for you here. So step 5, kind of drilling down a little bit here. Describe the main course or the main flow of events. And basically that should capture, well, as it says, really the main flow of what's going on. And then we'll talk about capturing different alternative ways of doing this a little later. But step 1, capture the main flow of events. So don't worry about the little side trips that might be taking. Step 6, define appropriate pre and post conditions for this flow of events. Getting things to work often needs a precondition before it can happen. So for the booking the hotel room, I think the system might be you need to, call the reservation agent. So the precondition might be, reservation agent is talking to the customer or the user. Or if it's a online system, user has logged onto the system and has clicked, let's imagine this is Travelocity, has clicked on hotel tab and is now, picking out which hotel on which dates. So there needs to be some preconditions typically. And also there are some post conditions, which are things that will happen or are conditions that have occurred at the end of the particular use case. So you need to define pre and post conditions for your use case. Step 7, identify alternative, error, and exception scenarios. So remember, step 5 was our main flow of events. And here we are on step 7 is now we need to look at alternate plot lines, things that could go wrong, things that are alternatives. And nearly always they round out the system, so we just need to make sure we capture those, So for instance, on the booking a hotel room, what if someone puts the checkout date before the check-in date? That's going to throw out an error. And so we need to say what we will do and when there is an error and what we will do if there is an error. And obviously in most booking systems, it just does a little check on the logic of checkout date. It's got to be after check-in date. And if it isn't, then there's just a little flag that comes up and gives you that warning and the user goes and changes that. Step 8 of 9, describe each scenario's alternative course with the flow of the events, adding those pre and post conditions. Basically, you just need to walk through the alternates and make sure you have the pre and posts. So that little error that we talked about, having the checkout date be before the check-in date, that's going to be an error. There needs to be there's going to be a precondition on that. Users logged into systems, picking a hotel, he's picked the location, now he's picking the dates. Those are all preconditions to that error even occurring. So those are preconditions. And then post conditions would be error message given. Well, actually, that would be the post condition right there. Give an error message. So you know what the outcome is from the system based on the actions of the actor. And then step 9, add to the use case any requirements that must be obeyed. Basically, that's it, just capture anything else that might be helpful that would users. And so those are the 9 steps in creating a use case narrative. And then step 9, add to the use case any requirements that must be obeyed. Basically, that's it, just capture anything else that might be helpful that would users. And so those are the 9 steps in creating a use case narrative. So let's walk through an example, and it's kind of one that we've already been discussing a little bit, and that's the hotel reservation system. And what we have here on this picture, of course, is the use case diagram for a particular use case, which is a potential guest making a room reservation. So on the left-hand side, we have the actor. The potential guest is how we've labeled it. Then in the middle, we have a box, which is our system, all of it, the hotel reservation system. And then we have one particular use case, how we will use this hotel reservation system. We've put that inside an oval, and we've labeled it Make Room Reservation. And then off to the right-hand side, we have another actor, which has to take part in the make room reservation use case. And that's the credit card authorization system. And we put this actor not as a stick figure, but as a box, and we label it actor because it's another system itself. And remember, with the primary actor is on the left-hand side, that's our potential guest. And so the arrow goes from the primary actor into the use case. And that's why it's labeled that way. And then we have the arrow going from the use case out to the secondary actor. So that's our use case diagram again. And you've seen all that. So how do we make a use case narrative? Well, first, you identify the actor's triggering behavior and then describe the system's response. And then repeat this for every future action of the actor followed by the system's response. I've kind of already mentioned this before. So it's actor wants to do something, interacts with system, system does something. So it's actor does this, system does that in response. Actor does this in response, system does that in response. And so that's really all we do here is we walk through all the steps in that process. So let's just make sure we understand a little bit about why we're doing use cases again, and these use case diagrams and these use case narratives. And the reason behind it is that we want to separate analysis from design. And by putting all the detail of the use case, the way we're going to use the system inside that oval, we can hide the design from the user or the person we're dealing with, and we can just give them analysis. So a use case diagram and use case narratives allows us to do the analysis portion free and independent of the design that's going to have to take place behind the scenes. And so that's essentially what's going on here is, and you can see that a little bit in this slide, a use case is an artifact of analysis. And what artifact means is kind of outcome, something we can put on file. And what's really nice about this is if we separate out the requirements from the design, if we separate out the analysis from the design, if we separate out what the system is supposed to do from how it will do it, then that allows us to work clearly with the users of the system, the people who are going to pay for the system, and make sure that we understand what the system is supposed to do. And if we can nail that down, that's nailing down the analysis. And then we can go ahead and do the design, as in, how will the system get this done? And so use case diagrams, use case narratives are a really nice way of allowing us, the systems analyst and designer, to separate out and make it clear, lock down with the user, the person who's going to pay for things, what it is that they want the system to do, not necessarily how it will do it. And as it also says on this slide, separating analysis from design also frees your test team to start developing their test plans directly from the use cases. So if you know how a system's going to be used, you can come up with some test scenarios, and you can come up with those independent of the way you're going to make the system work, which is really nice actually, because if you can independently set up a test for something before you've designed it, then when the design is complete and you already have your test plans in hand, then you can run them against what you've written, and you can really be sure that you are testing what the user wants rather than what you built. And separating that out is incredibly powerful and useful. So drilling down, how do we do a use case narrative? Well, again, UML doesn't have anything specific laid out for this. And one approach could be to just have a story written out. The problem with the stories is not everyone likes a story. And sometimes you can get lost in the words, a little bit too descriptive, almost a little bit too narrative. And so one way to fix this, and the way that I prefer and the way that I've seen most, is the use case narrative as flow of events. And what's really nice about this approach, as it says here, is that it allows you to clarify whether an event is actor initiated or systems initiated. And so we use numbering and indentation to split between the actor and the system. And a lot of times that just makes it clear for the user, because typically they're going to be the actor or working with the actor. And they're certainly not going to be the system, obviously. It allows them to really clearly differentiate what is kind of your responsibility as the systems analysis and designer, and what is their responsibility or what they're going to be using. So let's take a look at a partial example of a use case narrative flow of events. And here it is. This is the use case, and this is a great example. And I really, when you do your use case narratives, I'd like you to use this as your example, as your template. So what we have here is use case name. And remember, our use case was make room reservation. And then we have our simple one sentence description here. And as it says here, this use case allows the actor, which we've called potential guest, to use a web browser to specify the desired room features and dates and to obtain from the system a confirmed room reservation. That's a really nice one sentence succinct use case description. And this is one way for you to check your use case diagrams actually, is can you write a one sentence description. Now we drop into the use case narrative flow of events. 1. This use case starts when the actor visits the opening page. So we've started here with actor. Actor does something. And remember, a use case narrative typically starts with actor does something, system does responds. So 1, the use case starts when the actor visits the opening web page. 1.1, and we've indented it, the system prompts for the span of reservation days and room type. Then we go to 2, the actor, and remember this is back, so this is actor, identifies the room type and reservation day span. Then the system's going to respond, so we indent that and call it 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, and it's all the things the system's going to do. Validate the inputs, make sure we've got the correct room classes, check that we've got some availability and what they cost, display that back to the user, and then prompts the actor to make a selection between perhaps the 2 queen beds, 2 king beds, 1 king bed. So it could be that you've got 2 people in one room. Do you want a king bed or do you want 2 queen beds? And then the system will give those options back to the actor. And as you can see, then it's back to the actor to do their thing. And so the actor identifies the room type and so maybe back to we need 1 king and reservation day span. All of this stuff, all of this main flow of events here, that's all captured in that make room reservation oval. But now we're drilling down. As you can see, we're getting close to the logic of how you would program this to get the system to do it. And you can see we're already starting to get this notion that we're going to have to talk to a database about what beds are available, what reservations have already been made for certain days. But we've not specified the database. We don't even know what the fields are or anything. But as you can see from this narrative flow of events, we've got some logic coming up, validating the days that you're asking for, making sure you got the right number of people. Will they fit in the room? What sort of rooms do we have available for 2 people? If it's 4 people, you're not going to give them a 1 king bed room. You're going to need at least 2 queens. And so you can see some of the logic is starting to appear in these flow of events. Now, when you were doing your use case diagrams, some of you had a lot of ovals and some of you had a few ovals. And I know a fairly standard question here is, how many ovals? How deep do we go inside the use case of the system to do a proper use case diagram? Well, the first use case diagram is just a top-level diagram, has 1 oval, make use case, has 1 oval, and in our hotel reservation system, it is, one of those ovals is make room reservations. But there are alternate courses of behavior. And there is a way we notate these different courses of behavior. We still put them in ovals. Usually it breaks down that single use case. It's all the little alternatives that could happen underneath the make room reservation use case. It's a second level use case diagram. and we label things as it says here on this slide. We use the same oval notation, but their instance is an underlined. And so, let me just give you an example. So let's move on to the next slide. And we completed our main use of the system. So our top level use case diagram is make room reservation. Then our second level, which is this picture right here, has 4 different things that can happen as part of that one use case of making a room reservation. And the one right down at the bottom left is make, a successful credit card transaction. Just off to the right, so the bottom right effectively, one of the things that could happen as part of this use case is, hey, we have an invalid day span. So maybe we put our checkout date before the check-in date. And of course, we need to send some information back to the actor, the user, to tell them that. Off to the right there, we have another thing that could happen is you could put an invalid credit card in, wrong date, wrong number, wrong type. All sorts of things could go wrong with a credit card. And so we need to make sure we take care of that particular use of the system by an actor. And so we have a rejected credit card transaction as part of make room reservation. And then another thing we might want to do is part of a room reservation is we may want to cancel it. And so another scenario of a use case here is canceled make room reservation, and that's kind of top right. And so those are different scenarios, underlying levels of the main use case. And we completed our main use of the system. So our top level use case diagram is make room reservation. Then our second level, which is this picture right here, has 4 different things that can happen as part of that one use case of making a room reservation. And the one right down at the bottom left is make, a successful credit card transaction. Just off to the right, so the bottom right effectively, one of the things that could happen as part of this use case is, hey, we have an invalid day span. So maybe we put our checkout date before the check-in date. And of course, we need to send some information back to the actor, the user, to tell them that. Off to the right there, we have another thing that could happen is you could put an invalid credit card in, wrong date, wrong number, wrong type. All sorts of things could go wrong with a credit card. And so we need to make sure we take care of that particular use of the system by an actor. And so we have a rejected credit card transaction as part of make room reservation. And then another thing we might want to do is part of a room reservation is we may want to cancel it. And so another scenario of a use case here is canceled make room reservation, and that's kind of top right. And so those are different scenarios, underlying levels of the main use case. So as we've already discussed, there can be alternate courses through the system. That's why we have these secondary level use case diagrams. But as it turns out, of course, the additional flow that gets us through to these alternates or these errors, a lot of the stuff is almost exactly the same that the system's going to do. It's just one little error occurs. So in the credit card transaction, it might be that there's just an invalid, date, you input the wrong date in your credit card, and that's going to throw back an error. But everything up to that point is the same. You'll be happy to know that you don't have to reiterate everything. You can just focus on that one little piece of the credit card transaction failing and then passing back to the actor the fact that the date on the credit card was wrong. You just have to document that one piece, which is kind of nice. So all you have to do for an alternate course is kind of show where it's different and just leave everything else the same. So that makes things a lot easier. And take a look at this slide. These are alternate courses. So when you end an alternate course, it may have separate possibilities. It may be that you've got, you reach the same goal, just in an alternate way. And you basically say that as your post condition is, hey, we got to the same point. It may be it's just not possible to get there, which is essentially what's happening if you have the checkout date before the check-in date. So that will be the use case ends. We can't make a room reservation if you've done that. And it might be that you need a post condition kind of showing that you're going to abandon things. Or it might be on that make room reservation. A better example actually would be no rooms available for the date range that you've asked for. And then the user, of course, is going to abandon making a room reservation if that's the case. And so that will be the post condition for when your actor has selected the date range, the system has checked if there's any availability and found that there's none, tells the user abandons the use case, and our post condition is user abandoned use case because there's no rooms available. It might be that the use case just steps back to a previous behavior, and the best example of that, of course, with the room reservation is where you put in the checkout date before the check-in date. User fixes that, and then moves on. And so here's an example of an alternate course, and it's that invalid reservation day span. And as you can see, it's got this precondition here. So the only reason we're going to get an invalid reservation day span is if we, screw things up. And so the precondition is the actor invalidates an invalid reservation day span. It's more than 1 month or less than 1 day. So I guess in this system, you cannot book for more than a month. And maybe that's just a rule of the hotel. And I can see why they do that, actually. But that's a management decision, not a systems decision, and certainly not a systems analyst decision. That would have been determined by management and is part of your systems analysis process to figure out that you can't reserve rooms for more than 1 month. But nonetheless, here we go. So what does the system do when you've screwed things up on the date? It validates the inputs, fails the validation. That's step 2.1. Step 2.2, system displays error message and says you got to fix it. Step 3 moves back to the reservation span part of the process. So there you go. That's just how you document alternate courses through the system. So I said a little earlier that I had a template for you to do a use case narrative. Turns out there's actually another way of doing them. It's called the table-oriented way. And if you want to use this way, I am completely fine. I think some people just prefer it. To be fair, I have seen both. I've seen the other one more often, but if you want to use table-based, feel free. Let's walk through an example so you can see how it's done. And here it is. Well, it starts off just the same way. We've got a use case name. This is make room reservations. We've got our description. Won't go through that, but it's nicely written of what's going on. We're looking at the main course of events. So this is not the alternate. We are going to make a reservation and have a successful credit card transaction. We've got a precondition here. You've got to be on the web page and wanting to make a reservation. Kind of makes sense. And the outcome of this, the successful post condition, is we will get a confirmed room reservation. So let's take a look at the table-based version. And here it is. We have 3 columns. Ooh, and that looks just like our use case diagram if you think about it, because we have the actor on the left, we have the system in the middle, and we have the secondary actor on the right. And that's what we've got here. Potential guest, system, credit card authorization on the right. And so really nothing's different here from what we had before. We're just putting the, before we had 1 and then 1.1, and here we have 1 and 2. I know that sounds that was a little bit confusing, but this top row, before we had that labeled as 1 and 1.1. Here we've just got a row and we've labeled it 1 and 2. And again, though you can see it's got guest, system. And then second row is guest, system. So it's actor. Actor wants this, our actor does this, system does that. Actor does this, system does that. Nothing has changed here though, it's just it's a layout issue. And so, I'll show you on the video here how you could walk through the exact same example before. So you can see we've got, what was it? You look for a room and the system will validate, check the data, check the rooms. That's item 5 is check the rooms. Item 6, for each available room, determine the cost. 7, display the possible reservations back to the user. So now we're back to the user, which is why we have 9. And then the user selects the desired room. 10, now the system, so once your actor has selected a room, the potential guest, now we're back to prompting for billing information. That's the system. Now we're back to the actor, step 11. We supply the name, billing address, credit card number, and expiration date. That goes into the system and hands off pretty soon to our credit card authorization system. But as you can see here under 12, you can tell that our system here that we're designing is going to validate the input, a little bit of date validation and stuff like that, which kind of makes sense that we'd validate the dates. For the credit card is what that means. Then 13, our system hands these things off to the credit card system, which, you know, Visa does its thing or American Express does its thing, passes it back to our system, and then as it says here in item 15, marks room as reserved. We need to update our database to reserve the room, calculate a unique reservation number on 16, and then 17 is, hey, we need to tell the guest, and then 18 is, this use case ends when we've got a satisfactory reservation and we leave the system. Now, you've used hotel reservation systems. Usually there's an email, we need to enter an email address, all that good stuff. But nonetheless, that's a great way to lay things out. Just as good as the other way, you use which one you prefer. And then right here at the end of Systems Analysis and Design, Use Case Narratives, let me just show you the table-based version of how to do alternate courses. And it's not rocket science here. It's almost exactly the same. We still have the 3 columns. Each row takes care of what's going on. And so this first example is invalid reservation day span. So again, we screwed something up. It was more than a month or less than a day. And so this kind of walks through what the system does. And again, it's only the piece where the system and the user, the actor, do something different. That's the only thing we specify in these alternate courses. So here we have alternate course number 1, invalid reservation day span. And remember, this was that secondary level use case diagram that we had where there was 5 use cases on it. Alternate course 2 was credit card authorization fails. This is how you would lay it out. The credit card system rejects the transaction. That's 1. 2, the system informs the actor of the transaction rejected. And 3, prompts for, correcting the credit card. 4, the potential guest has to correct the credit card. So that's alternate course number 2, subsidiary sub use case. And then what if we want to just cancel the reservation? And that's kind of explained on this use case narrative here. So that's it. That is the end of this section for use case narratives, object-oriented systems analysis and design.